Hello my friends and welcome back. You're watching Making It Look Great number 5. My name is Moltenan and this video tutorial is meant to teach you two things. First thing is the all usual tips and tricks and techniques and secret that we share with you on this Making It Look Great series, so the usual stuff. But the other thing is that I want to show you that great design is not only about the looks, it's also about planning, organization, discipline, and elegant solutions. As we move forward, you will see what I mean. So let's just take a quick look at what we'll be creating today. I must say that I really like this look. It's something that I've always wanted to do, but never had a chance to do it actually until few weeks back when I was actually asked to do motion graphics that would be then used for on-set playback during shooting of some TV series. So I was pretty happy to do it, and I'm also very happy to share the techniques that I used in this video with you. So let's get started. So once again, this is the final look that we'll be creating, and believe it or not, there are only 2 keyframes in this whole project. I mean in this main part here, which is the most complex part. Those numbers flying here are basically just 4 different text layers animated across time. Nothing too fancy, just the regular stuff. But this piece actually uses only 2 keyframes, and in some cases we could even get rid of those. So let's get started. Here I've prepared a composition with all the text layers that we'll be using, and some of them are even animated. So let me just go through them very quickly. This is just a regular text layer. It's just one single text layer. I've used the tab key to create the spaces in here, and also colored the individual words using color sampler, so I can just change the color like that if I like to, right? Nothing very complicated. The rest of the animation are actually 4 different text layers, as you see. Some of them have the typewriter preset applied to them. So this is the one. Just simply apply it to the text layer. Let me just show it on this one. If I just apply it, this is the animation that it creates. Right, very simple. Just drag and drop it onto your text layer and that's it. So this layer uses typewriter and the others don't, but they simply animate across time using simple position keyframes. One additional information, the font that I use in here is called Fixed Sys, and this is a font that comes on Windows. If you're working on Macintosh, you probably have to find something similar, but the important thing is that this font is monospaced, so each character has the same width, which is pretty important if we're positioning text columns and text blocks using tabs like I did in here. And besides, this is the exact computer-like, terminal-like look that we're trying to achieve here. Please also note that I set the size of the text to 23 and the leading to 28. This will be important later on. Okay, so let's just start making this look great like this piece in here. As you already noticed, when I apply the typewriter effect, it actually looks pretty good, but unfortunately the text is written in the downward direction, and I want to change that. I want to have the text starting at the bottom and then moving up as new lines are created. So how do we actually do that? Of course we can use keyframes, but I wouldn't be myself if I wouldn't figure out a cool expression to do that instead using the keyframes. Keyframes are bad. The less keyframes, the better. And this is the planning and elegant solution approach that I mentioned in the beginning. If you're going to do this using expressions, you're going to have a lot of flexibility. You will be able to change the length of your text, change your mind, change position, and all other features of this particular block of text and not have to reposition any keyframes. And this actually cuts down the time you need to spend on working on an animation. And this is generally true for applying expressions basically to any parameters of any layers. Of course there are exceptions, but let's not get into details, because I could talk about expressions like for decades. So let's just stick with the simple stuff. Let's take a look at the keyframes that typewriter effect has created. Basically, it created a new range selector, which is a text animator, and it is based on percentage, as you see here. As the percentage changes, it changes the amount of text displayed on the layer. Pretty simple. So how do we actually make this text go up a given amount of pixels each time a new line is created? I have created an expression to do that, and I'm not going to type the whole expression in right now. I'm just going to paste it in just for the sake of time of this tutorial. And I'm just going to go briefly through this expression. Let me just turn off those palettes here so they don't get in the way. Let me just go very quickly through the expression. We're assigning the text of the layer to the variable called myText. Then we're taking the value of the range animator, so basically the percentage that we just talked about, and we're converting that percentage to the actual amount of letters that it means. So if we would have 200 letters in our text and we would set the percentage to 50%, then the amount of letters would be 100. So we're converting the percentage of this range selector of the text animator to the actual number of letters that it corresponds to. Then we're going through the text until that point, so until that percentage, and we're counting new lines that occurred till that point in time, so until that percentage. Each time a new line character is there, we're simply increasing this value in here that is called line offset, and then we're multiplying that number by a presetted amount of pixels. I hope that makes sense. In other words, if the line of text is 30 pixels tall and we have 3 lines of text, then we should move the whole block of text 3 times 30 pixels up, so 90 pixels up. Some of you might notice that I'm referring to new line offset slider that is placed on this layer, and we actually have a slider here that is called new line offset. And remember how I said that I've set the leading of this text to 28 pixels? Well, this is the same value in here. New line offset is equal to 28 pixels. If you're wondering why I didn't just grab this value from the text properties using expressions, well, the answer is simply it's not possible. Unfortunately, you cannot grab the size of the text, leading, kerning, any attributes of the text are not accessible in expressions, which is pretty painful, but we can easily work around this using sliders. Okay, so much for the expression. Let me just show you how it works. See, each time a new line is created, let me just go very slowly. Each time a new line is created, the text moves up 28 pixels. And this is exactly what we want. Doesn't it look cool? Okay, I know it does because I like it very much and I'm sure you'll like it as well. So, let's just set the text up. Let's go back to the beginning. So we have this line visible, only this line. And remember how I said planning and elegant solutions and that you can change your mind and everything? Well, here we go. We're just moving this layer down just about here. And this expression will still work. It's just beautiful. It's just so perfect. You can do so many things with it and not have to worry about repositioning keyframes and stuff like that. So let's just change the speed of this whole animation and let's move this keyframe here and maybe use some easy ease. So F9. So it will start slowly and then will speed up. So let's just do a quick test render. Okay, this looks very cool. Just take a look how it slows down and speeds up. Very nice. And we can even go into the graph editor here and just grab the handles and just make it start really slowly. Then just go very, very quickly and slow down like that. And let's just see how that affects the whole animation. Oh yes. See how flexible this is? If you would use regular keyframes on the position, then you would have to reposition the keyframes all the way through this very short animation. So remember, expressions are your best friend in any type of animation. Okay, let's go a step further. I said all about elegant solutions, so let's make it really elegant. Try to imagine what would happen if I would put a larger block of text here. Well, obviously the text would go off screen, and we definitely don't want that. So in other words, we have to create some kind of a buffer, or basically define how many lines of text are visible at once on the screen. And this is what this slider is here for. It's called lines buffer, and it's not being used yet, but we're going to create some expressions to take advantage of it. The simplest solution would be creating a mask, and the solution I'm going to show you is actually going to use a mask, but the mask is going to be a shape layer, which is pretty important, and I'll try to explain very quickly why that is. So let me just create a new shape layer and make sure that none of the layers is selected, because otherwise that would be just creating a mask. So just click to make sure, and then double click on the rectangular mask tool. And here I have some settings that I used before. So let me just set this color to be solid and set the stroke to none, non-existent. Okay, and the main difference between shape layers and using any other type of layer, like just a simple solid, is that we need to dynamically resize and reposition this layer, and we need to be very precise at it in order to configure how many lines we want to be able to see in this terminal text animation. If we would use a regular solid layer, let me just show you. If we would use a regular solid layer as a mask, oh, sorry, wrong layer. Then we would need to, of course, scale it down and up in order to set the amount of visible lines of the text. And unfortunately, in any other layers than shape layers, we only have control over the scale parameter, which is set in percentage. So in other words, we would have to calculate the amount of lines into the pixels, into the percentage that we need to set the layer to, and that's just too much unnecessary math that we need to do. And shape layers actually have their size defined in pixels, like so. So let me just turn this layer on and show you how that works. If I set it to 100, then it's going to be 100. Of course, I need to switch off the constraint parameter and set the width to what it was, like that. And right now this layer is 100 pixels tall, and 200, and so on and so forth. So that is in fact very cool. But there's another problem. Unfortunately, the position of the shape layers and their transform properties are calculated a little bit differently than any other layer. In a solid layer, I would just take the pan behind tool and move the anchor point down like so, and then just set the size to 300 or 200%, 300%. And as you can see in here, it actually goes both ways anyway. So that's a little bit of a problem. So we're not only going to have to set the size of this layer, but we'll also have to reposition it and change the anchor point in order to keep this layer scaling only on this axis, only in one direction. I can't even do that using a mouse, so you see what the problem is. Oh, I created an additional layer by accident. No worries. So let's just get right to it. First of all, the position of this layer should be set to the position of our text layer, right? On the y-axis, because x-axis is not of our interest. So let's just create an expression to do that. And just twirl down the position. Alt-click to create a new expression. And let's type in x equals 0, y equals, and now let's just simply take the pick whip, go to the terminal layer and say transform position. I could simply point to the y parameter of the position if it would be twirled down in here, but it isn't, so I'm just going to type it in. And now the key. Remember that the position of this text layer is changing on each new line that is added to the text. And the position of the shape layer shouldn't change. It should be exactly what the text layer position was at the first frame. So we're going to add value at time. This little piece of code allows us to check the values of a given layer in a specific point in time. So let's just say that we were interested in the first frame, so in other words 0 seconds, and we're interested only in the y position of this transform position parameter, so we're putting 1 in the square brackets. If this is a little bit confusing, I suggest watching the previous editions of Making It Look Great, because it was covered several times. And in the end, let's just close up the expression by putting the values like that. Okay, so far so good, but obviously we have a problem. The real anchor point of the shape layer is always in the middle. Like I showed you, remember I used the pan behind tool and then increased the size, and even though the anchor point was set at the lower edge, it was going both directions. So it's always in the middle. So how do we fix that? Well, it's also pretty easy. We have to open up the anchor point and add an expression. So alt-clicking, and we're defining x, which should be half of the width of our comp, right? So let's just say this comp width divided by 2. And we also need to make this a negative number, because otherwise it would go in the wrong direction. It would go left and we would have to make it go right. So that's it. Y position should be the height of our shape layer. So let's just say, oh, of course we're going to get an error because I need to twirl down some parameters in here. So this is going to be the size on the y-axis, and we need to divide it by 2. Remember, the anchor point is right in the middle, so whatever we do, we need to divide it by 2 in this case. Like that, and we can close it up. X and Y. And okay, that looks good. And let's just change the size, 500. Very good. Very good, works fine. But remember, we have this nice slider there that says line buffer. So let's just use that and apply an expression to the size parameter. Let me just log this palette for now so we can refer to it using pick whip. And let's just alt click on the size and create another simple expression. X equals whatever the value is on the x-axis, and then Y equals this value, so how many lines we have, how many lines we want to have visible, and then we have to multiply it by the amount of pixels that one line occupies, so basically by the new line offset. And that's basically it. It looks complex, but it's actually very simple. Okay, so let's just see if this works. Let's make it 1. And ta-da! We have 1 line. Very good. We're getting some additional pixels here. Well, this is unfortunately not a precise science in terms of fonts, because the leading that we've used is actually calculated based on the baseline of the text, and some letters, some chars may actually go below that baseline. Just try thinking very fancy handwritten like fonts. They're all aligned very well horizontally, but when you have letters like Y or J or G, they just go below this baseline. So this is what's causing it. But I think we can try to create another slider. And let's call this one Fine Tune. And we can modify this Y variable here, and we can make it equal to whatever it is minus this value. And I even think that I'm going to divide this value by 10. So in other words, if we want to offset it by 1 pixel, we have to set it to 10 in here. And if we want to offset it by half a pixel, we set it to 5, and so on and so forth. So it's pretty convenient. Okay, let's confirm the expression and try putting number like 60. And that actually works. Very good. Let's just close this down, call this mask. Okay, this is as far as we go with expressions and geekiness in this tutorial, so don't worry, more fun stuff are coming right now. So let's just see how this works when we have only 1 line visible. See how cool this is? I really like this. And just imagine how many things you can do with this simple setup. How many different variations of animating text and the terminal-like way you can do. It's really amazing. Okay, but I actually think we're going to set the lines buffer to a higher number because the text is designed that way that it fits on one screen very well, so we don't actually need to use this lines buffer. But just in case, you know, this is the good planning, elegant solution, and discipline. If you're going with expressions, just do whatever you can with expressions so you have the maximum flexibility. Okay, very good. So now let's get to the making it look great part of this tutorial. So let's just take a look at how this text looks like here. You can see 3 basic differences. The first one is the flickering. If you take a look at one part of the image, you can see that everything gets lighter and darker every other frame, aside of these highlights in here. So we have a basic flicker. So let's just do that right now. And we're going to use a adjustment layer to achieve that effect. So let's just create a new adjustment layer. And let's call it, let's just call it flicker. We can unlock this palette for now. And the trick here is to change the opacity of the layers beneath. But it would be easy if we would only want to change the opacity of this layer. But remember, we've got 4 different text layers in here. So how do we change the opacity of all of those layers using adjustment layer? Well, that is pretty simple. We just have to apply the transform effect. And as you can see, when I change the opacity, everything changes. Let me just bring up the transparency grid here. And the transparency of all of those layers changes. Very good. So let's just set up a simple expression again, but I promise very simple this time, to create the flicker effect. We want to create the flicker every other frame. So in other words, we need to base this expression on time and specifically on frames. There is a function called time, but unfortunately it gives us the value in seconds and we want a frame. So there is a handy function that can help us in this flyout menu here that is called time to frames, and I'm just going to select it and click it, and that way I can calculate the amount of frames. Let me just show you how it looks. Right now we're at frame 0, so the opacity is 0. If you go to frame 26, the opacity is 26, 50, 75, and so on and so forth. Okay, so now the question is, how do we make the opacity flicker every other frame? Well, this is actually pretty simple. What we need to do is we need to create a new variable that will hold the current frame number. So I'm going to call this time to frames, so TTF. And now the value of TTF is equal to current frame based on this expression generated from the flyout menu. And now we're going to create a very simple condition. We're going to say if current frame, so TTF, modulus 2 is equal to 0, then set the opacity to 100, and in any other case set it to 80. Now modulus, if you don't remember, gives us the remainder of division. So in other words, we're dividing TTF by 2 and checking what the remainder is. So in other words, if the remainder is 0, we're setting the opacity to 100. If the remainder is anything else, and in our case, well, when we're dividing by 2, it can only be 1, the opacity will be set to 80. So let's hit enter to confirm and see how the expression changes the whole look. Let's just go here and render a few frames. Oh yes, very nice. Very nice. Ain't that cool? Sweet. We've got this very nice flickering going on. So let's take another look at the rendered file, and we've got this scan line kind of effect going on. So let's just create that, and it's going to be very simple. No expressions this time. And let's apply a transition effect called Venetian blinds. And we're just going to drag that into our layer, and let's just see how it works. Okay, obviously it works in the wrong direction, so we need to set it to 90 degrees like so. Okay, very good. And we need to set the width and the feather. So let's set the width to a small number like 7. Oh, that actually looks good. And now let's just feather it out. Let me just zoom in here so we can see this a little bit better. Move to full res and set the feather to 5. No, that's too much. 3. Okay, I think we can live with 3. Yeah, that actually looks good. Along with the flicker, it gives a very nice effect. Let's just zoom out and move to half res again and render a few frames. Okay, cool. So the only thing left to do is to create this highlight glow on the text. So that should be fairly simple to do as well. So let's create another adjustment layer. Let's call this one glow. Oops, sorry. Glow. And let's apply glow to this layer. Okay, the default settings look okay. Maybe we can decrease the threshold to make this look a little bit more intense if it changes anything. No, it doesn't. So, okay, I think we can leave this as it is. And now we need to make this glow very selective, so it doesn't affect the whole text, it only affects portions of it. So how do we do that? Well, we need to create some sort of a mask. And once again, we could just use a solid and then just move it up and down using a wiggle expression, for example. But remember how I told you about the good planning and elegant solutions? Well, I think that actually when we don't need to change the position of the layer, it's a little bit better, because then we can add some things to the layer that we haven't planned to put there at the beginning, and therefore there's a less risk that we're going to need to change something. So let's just call this glow mask. And how do we create a mask out of the solid? Well, we can apply the grid effect, which I use very often in creating rectangular mask shapes. And first thing is we need to move this point far away, and we need to put this one here. And it looks like we need to move the anchor point even further. So let's just set it to like 5,000 just to make sure. And the Y, we can set it to 5,000 as well. And that way we can easily just move this little piece up and down and use it as a mask. And as you can see, we've got the border settings here. So let's set it to a high number like 100. And that's actually looking good. And we can also feather this out if we like, 50 or not. We can change the color. We can do all sorts of stuff with it. And this is very, very comfortable, very handy way to create that kind of masks. So the only thing left to do is to randomize the Y position of this parameter. So let's just alt click and create another simple expression. And let's say X position, we want it to be equal to whatever we set it manually. So value 0, and Y, we want to make it random, and it should be randomized between 0 and this comp height, right? Because it only needs to go from top to bottom, so that should be it. And now let's just close the expression X and Y and see how this works. Okay, very good. So now the only thing left to do is to set it as a alpha matte to our glow layer. Like that. Ah, very nice. Let's just render a few frames to see how it looks. Very cool. I like it. I like it very much. It looks really great. Okay, so I guess that's it. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and see you in the next one. I got you there, didn't I? Remember how I said that this is the final look that we're looking for? Well, I lied, because actually this is the final look. And this is where good planning and organization and discipline and elegant solutions pay off, because now we've created this great design element, this great looking text animation, and since it's so flexible and so easy to change and manage, we can create many different looks based on this simple setup. So let's just go ahead and create this great looking piece that I just showed you. Let's just create a new comp. Same size. And let's just put our terminal animation inside. Oh yes, we can trim this like so. Okay, looks very nice. So the first thing is to create a nice background. So just go ahead and create a nice background. It should be green, so something like that, and like that. Okay, let's just rename the layer to screen, and we need to add Venetian blinds as well in here so we can create a matching look, so it basically looks like a monitor. To do that, I think we can actually create a new adjustment layer. Even though it's just one effect we're applying, if we're not sure what we're going to do, it's always good to use an adjustment layer, because that way it's easier to then add additional effects and change the overall look of the animation. So let's just call this scanline and add Venetian blinds to it. Like so, and I think that we can even set it up the same way we did with the text. So 50% complete, I guess. 90 degrees. What was the width? I think it was 7, and feather was 3. Okay, that looks good. Let's just make sure if it's all the same. Flicker, Venetian blinds, 49. Let's make it even 50. Okay, looks good. So let's just take another look at this rendered file. We need to have the highlight and some distortions going on. Okay, so let's just start with the highlight and with this spherical kind of a shape. So first of all, let's create a highlight using a new solid, new white solid this time. Hit OK to confirm. We wanted to put it below the scan line, and let's call this highlight. And now we're going to just use a simple mask tool to create the highlight. So let's just draw it like that. Okay, that should be fine. And now we can simply go to the feather options and feather it out quite a bit. 50 pixels should do just fine. Okay, maybe we can even expand it. So let's just go into the mask options and expand it just a little bit, 20 pixels, and feather it out a little bit more, 80. Okay, that starts to look good, but we need to change the blending mode to add, and that way it will stand out a little bit more. Maybe we should also increase the feather anyway, just a little bit. 150. Oh yeah, that looks much better. And on top of every layer in here, we need to create a new adjustment layer and just bend this to create this illusion of a monitor. So let's just call this layer bender. And we're not going to use any kind of warping. We're going to use optics compensation. And this will work very well in this case. So let's just set the orientation to diagonal and set it to 50, maybe more, 55. That looks good. And the cool thing about this is that we don't need to worry about any graphics going behind the area of the monitor, because this optic compensation sits on top of every other layer, so it bends all the layers beneath. So there's actually no chance that anything will show up on those dark areas unless we're going to put it above this layer. So let's just make sure we're keeping everything beneath it. And I'd like to soften up the edges a little bit. So I'm going to create a new solid. This time is going to be black. Hit OK to confirm. And let's create a mask by double clicking. And I need to show the mask. And I'm also going to double click on the mask itself so I can freely resize it just like that. Hit enter to confirm. And yes, let's call this black softener and move it below the bender. Now you see what's going on. but we need to invert the mask or simply set it to subtract. And now we can press MM, go into the feathering options and set the feather to 50. Let me just turn off the mask so I can see what's going on here. 100. Maybe expand it a little bit. 20. 30. Just trying to get the right settings. 50. Oh yes, this is it. This is it. Looks very nice. Okay, so we can twirl this up. And I'm thinking about creating a flicker effect on the monitor itself, independently of the flickering of the text. I don't want to change the opacity, so I think that we can change the transition of the Venetian blinds, because if it goes like that, you see that the monitor gets more or less intense. So let's set it to 50 and create a simple wiggle expression that you should already be familiar with. So let's just set it to wiggle 15 times per second and within the range of 4 units. Let's see how that looks. Okay, it is a slight difference, and since it's wiggling and not changing every other frame for presetted values like the flicker of the text, it really gets this unique look. So it's like two separate things. The text is flickering on its own and the monitor is flickering on its own. Kind of cool. Let's see how that looks. Okay, I think that's a little bit too much, so maybe let's change the offset value here to 2. We could of course use sliders and connect it to the sliders, but it's just a simple wiggle expression. If we get it right this time, we're not going to need to change it. And besides, I want to cut the length of this tutorial because it's already too long. So the scanline is set, so we can lock it. Highlight is set, we can lock it. Screen is set, we can lock it as well. And now the terminal layer. Let's just take another look at our final comp. And we can see that a lot of distortion going on. So let's just analyze what's going on here. Well, I obviously know what's going on here because I made it, but I just want you to look through this very closely. We have an overall distortion on the text, and we also have these highlight areas getting distorted in a different way. So I think we can start with distorting the whole thing, and then we'll get into distorting those certain highlighted parts of the text. So let's just go back and do that right now. And we're going to use wave warp to do that. Okay, the direction is wrong. We need to set it to 0. So that way it warps sideways. And also we need to change the type of the wave. And we're going to set it to smooth noise. So let me just go ahead further in time so you can see what's going on. And yeah, those settings are actually pretty good. Maybe it's a little bit too much. I want this to be very, very subtle. So let's change the width of the wave. If I set it to 0, we're going to see that nothing is going to be changing. Let's leave it at 20. I think that's fine. And the actual amount of distortion is controlled by wave height in this case. So I want to wiggle this as well. So let's just alt click and create a simple expression. Wiggle 10 times per second within the range of 20. And that should be fine. Let's just see how it looks. Move a little bit back and render it out. Okay, the text gets a little bit distorted once in a while, but I'm thinking about creating a very heavy distortion, very heavy overall distortion once in a while. So how do we do that? We can modify the expression by adding a condition. Let's just scroll down a little bit and convert it into a variable. So let's just call this dist for distortion, and let's create a condition that says if our distortion value is equal to 10, which is definitely in the range of the wiggle. We want the distortion to be 50. And that way, the distortion will be 50 only when the wiggle will give us a value of 10. So that shouldn't be very often. Okay, let's take a look. It's really hard to say whether or not this is happening. The problem might be that the wiggle doesn't give us integer values. So it gives us like 10.2 or 9.8. So you must be really lucky to hit the exact value of 10. So to increase the probability, we can check if this wiggle value rounded up or rounded down is equal to 10. So let's just try that. Math round, and this variable that we've created is equal to 10, and then set it to 50. And let's try that. And do a quick render. Okay, and see how it looks. Ah, we got it there. Did you see it? Let me just find the frame. It was somewhere around here. Oh yes, here it is. See? So it happens very rarely, but it does happen. And that's actually very, very cool technique. Okay, so far so good, but we're not done yet. Let's push it a little bit further. Let's take another look on this rendered file. And now we can start dealing with this distortion of those highlights in here. So let's just do that. And we can do it in the text animation by adding a wave warp effect to our glow adjustment layer. Just like that. Now we need to find a frame where the glow affects a nice portion of the text. I want to find a frame where it sits right in the center. Okay, here it is. So we need to change the direction again. And let's change the wave type to square in this case, because that way it offsets like a whole blocks of pixels without any transition in between, like the sine wave. And remember what the leading was for our text? Well, it was 28 pixels. So why don't we try that and try to change the phase so that it matches with our lines? Wouldn't that be cool? So we could basically offset like each line a couple of pixels this way or the other. I'm just changing the phase values here. And it does start to look like we want. Of course, we're getting a little bit of those other charts, other lines in here, but come on, this should be distorted look, so we can live with that. Okay, I think that should be it. No further configuration is required for this, I think. Let's just take a quick look on how it looks. Okay, so this is done. We can go back to our comp one here. And what else can we do about it? Let's just take a look at the final comp again. And this definitely looks more intense. So I think that simply adding a glow effect to the text layer should fix it. So let's just do that right now. Glow onto the text layer. Okay, looks much better. But still, it misses something. And I think that if we set the mode to overlay or add, will be just fine. Well, overlay works great. I don't think we need to change anything. And so the last thing to do is to create this traveling line in here. And we can use it also by using the grid effect. So let's just do that. Create a new solid, whatever the color. Apply the grid effect, like so. And again, move the anchor point far away on the X and on the Y. Move this point here. Increase the border to 100 again. I think that should work fine, and we can feather this out this time quite a bit, 50 pixels maybe. I think it's a little bit too much. 30, 40. Okay, 40 is just fine. And I think we can change the color to a yellowish green. Oh yes, this is very, very nice. And of course, don't forget to put it below the bender, like I said, and below the scan line as well. Now let's just set the blending mode to overlay. No, maybe soft light. Yes, that's a little bit more subtle. Let's call this layer traveling line, and we're going to use another expression to define the motion of this line. So let's just alt click on the corner, because that's what we'll be changing, and the expression is going to be very similar to the mask expression in the terminal pre-comp. So X is equal to whatever value we set it manually, and Y should be changing across time. So let's just try time multiplied by some number, and then just output the position in an array X and Y. Hit enter to confirm, and let's just see how that looks. Okay, the line is going down, very good, but it's not going back. It should go in a loop, and I like it to go from the bottom instead from the top. So how do we change that? Well, it's actually pretty simple. What we need to do is to modify this expression so that the Y is equal to the modulus of time multiplied by a number, and this comp height. And that way, this equation will give us the remainder of dividing this value by this value. So in other words, Y will be changing in the range from 0 to this comp height, and then it will loop back and go in an infinite loop like that. Okay, very cool. But I'd like to go in the opposite direction. So we need to just close all this into parentheses and put this comp height at the beginning and subtract everything else from it. And that way it should go up. Okay, very good. But there's also one more thing I want to do. Since it's going exactly from 0 to the height of the comp, we don't get any kind of a pause between the moment that this line goes off screen, and I kind of like to have a small pause. So instead of using this comp height, I can use a predefined value like 900. And if you want to be very elegant, very disciplined, very organized and well planned, you would probably want to create a slider to control this value. But just to cut the time of this tutorial, I'm going to hard code a value of 900. And since 900 is bigger than our comp height, it's going to create a small gap before the line goes back on the screen. See, it doesn't show up immediately after it's gone. Okay, that's fine. That's very good. I think it's a good time to save the project. And I want to do a small modification. If you look closely here, whenever the line crosses the text, it highlights it a little bit more. So we might try different blending modes like add or something like that, but in that case it will add up to the whole thing. And I think that actually what we need to do is take this traveling line, pre-compose it, and move all attributes, then create a new adjustment layer just on top of this terminal text and apply a glow. Another glow. Yes, another glow. But this time we're going to use this traveling line as an alpha matte to this glow effect. So let's just do that. Okay, already looks better. Let's just decrease the threshold so it lights up a little bit more, and increase the radius. Maybe let's change the threshold again. Okay, yes, that's it. That's it. See how it gets intensified in the text, but then it just fades out as the text is gone? Very, very nice. And this is actually the final look I was looking for. So let's just call this glow, or maybe traveling glow. Traveling glow, traveling line. Pre-comp, very good, very good. Terminal, everything's fine. So, the only thing left to do in terms of organizing is naming this composition final retro terminal, and just render it out. It's ready to use. And see how simple it was to take the well-designed, well-planned element and then turn it into something completely different, like the thing that you see in here. It was very simple, very quick, and it would be even quicker if I wouldn't be talking all the time. So remember, elegant solutions, good planning, good organization, discipline, and using expressions whenever you can, as far as it's not overcomplicating things. Okay guys, so I hope you've enjoyed watching this tutorial as much as I enjoyed recording it, and I hope you've learned a lot from it. Once again, this is Moltenan for Making It Look Great number 5. See you in the next video. Happy After Effects Day.